So part one is essentially lower back pain, if you want to call it that. I'm not going to go into any great depth. I've got other episodes and other tutorials on that, so you can just explore my channel for more specific ones. But if we're talking about overcoming an injury and in some respects minimizing the risk of injury, what we need to think about is building a margin of error. Now, we'll sort of come full circle when it comes back to part 4. When we talk about the low back account, we'll talk about that in a little bit more depth. But essentially, when we're overcoming an injury, we need to think about the injury itself. So we need to understand what the triggers are. So what is triggering the pain? Is it the posture you're in? Is it the activity that you're doing? Is it just simply the endurance or fatigue levels within the lower back? So that it doesn't really matter about the activity, it's just more the duration that you're doing the activity for. So it's your low back's ability to keep going. So the activity isn't necessarily important because that changes. It's more just the endurance and the fatigue of the lower back that's triggering the pain. So there are many others. Another one, because we're going to be talking about it, is exercise. So are there particular exercises that trigger the pain? What is it about those exercises? Is it the load? Is it the repetition? Is it a part of the movement? So what that leads us on to is, once we can understand those triggers, it's then either removing them completely or just adapting and modifying movement to be able to move. So some triggers you will be required to adapt. So if it's lifting, you will just have to adapt how you lift, because you are going to lift things in every day. You're going to lift a child up off the floor. You're going to lift some shopping bags up. You're going to pick a box up. So there are all these different opportunities in which you are going to lift. So that is one thing to modify. If it's an endurance or fatigue element, then you can eliminate that by just breaking the task up. So if you're sat down and your back fatigues after 10 minutes, you can eliminate that trigger by sitting down for, say, 5 or 7 minutes, then getting up, having a walk around, maybe do a couple of exercises, couple of stretches, whatever it needs to be, sit yourself back down, and then that is your way of eliminating that trigger of the time frame. When it comes to building a margin of error and minimizing risk, it's about eliminating those triggers, adapting movement, modifying movement. Because when we talk about triggering the pain, if you're constantly triggering the pain, you have a very small margin of error. And whenever you go into a posture, or whenever you go into a position, or whenever you do an exercise, you are on the cusp of triggering that pain. And I guess that will sort of lead me on to, as I've talked about a low back pain before, it's not necessarily, you can't think of it like a broken bone. It's an injury that heals and then you're better. It's very much a condition of the back, and a poor condition of the back is very close to pain. So whenever you do that one movement, it triggers. A better condition of the lower back is one that is further away from that cusp, or from that critical point of triggering the pain, because you have a margin of error. So by the simple fact of removing triggers, you are starting to build that margin of error. Now, that then doesn't sort of complete the job. What we then need to do is start thinking about movement as a whole, exercise as a whole, and how we can build it and improve it to be able to continue building that margin of error, but also doing it in a way that promotes the health of the spine. Now, what does that mean? Well, most back injuries are a build-up of what is known as microtraumas or micro-injuries. So when you do something wrong, you may get a micro-injury or a micro-trauma within the spine, but you don't realise that that's just happened because there is no pain whilst that's happening. So these micro-traumas and micro-injuries build up, and then eventually it hits that critical point where that margin of error has run out and you get the pain. So we have to think about the mechanics of the spine, the mechanics that promote a poor condition and the mechanics that promote a healthier condition of the lower back. Now, I've worded it in that way specifically because we are talking about the condition rather than a one moment injury. I was running along, someone clattered into me, and I twisted my ankle, and then I was injured. That's just one traumatic moment that injures the ankle or injures the knee. Most back injuries don't happen like that. They happen over time, over weeks, over months, potentially over years. So we have to think about it in that way. So what we're going to do next in part 2, we're going to talk about posture of the spine. And we're going to think about, should we move it or should we not move it?